Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. My guest today is best-selling author Patti Callahan Henry, who has just published her 17th book of fiction. Ms. Henry has had big successes with Becoming Mrs. Lewis and Surviving Savannah, but this new book, The Secret Book of Flora Lee, promises to be a real triumph. I spoke with Patti Callahan Henry in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Patti, nice to see you again.
Hi, Don. I'm always happy to see you.
I always thank people for coming, but I'm going to make a special effort this time because you've been on the road for how long?
3 weeks.
21 days. How many cities?
I think 25 cities. I know. It's been
fantastic.
I know, but I get to talk about the Secret Book of Flora Lee, so what could be better?
And even today, this morning, where did you wake up this morning?
Woke up in Nashville.
Uh-huh.
Drove to Huntsville, the incredible library system there, and did an event. And now I'm here with you, and tonight we'll be at Ernest and Hadley.
So you'll have, well, at least three events just today.
Yeah.
What'd you do in Nashville?
Parnassus.
Oh,
and Landmark. I did 2 events I actually even signed books in the airport in Nashville. So it's been an amazing experience.
I have been. I'm not an internet. I'm not not at all a social media follower, but I have seen notices of your triumphal tour through the Southeast. Your book was published, and at the minute it was published, it landed on the bestseller list.
It's been amazing. And I've even been to New Jersey, Cleveland. I've been all over the place. But yes, I mean, to have the book hit the New York Times list at number 8 in the top 10 on its first week was a very surreal, thrilling, exciting experience that hasn't happened to me in that way before. And I was on the road, and they called, and I was like, you better not be joking. So
No.
I know it's been an incredible experience.
No, it's an experience that experience is only had by John Grisham and Stephen King and
so fun.
a couple other people.
It's fun.
It is your 17th book?
It
your
is
18th,
my
17th?
17th.
Incredible. It's incredible. Well, over time, had read several of your first 13, 14.
Probably.
And they were very domestic.
Yes. That's
fact,
a good word. I wouldn't have thought, yes.
I
I would say they're family dramas, but you're right.
Right.
They're
They
very
took
domestic.
place in the Southeast. A lot of them took place at the shore.
Yes.
And they were very American books. Of your last 4 books, 3 take place in England. You've become an Anglophile.
I have.
How and what made a very, very Southern American author write 3 novels set in England?
When I decided to write about Joy Davidman, which is the book Becoming Mrs. Lewis, I needed to do a lot of British research. I had to fly there, tour there. You know, I fell in love with Oxford, with the Oxfordshire countryside. I'd been to London numerous times, but fell in love with it. And I don't know, I don't think we can always explain why we love something. But the minute I went to the British countryside, I fell in love. I felt as if I'd been there before. I felt as if maybe I grew up there. It had like a resonance.
We're on the very verge of a previous life here.
Yes, exactly. Ancestral memories. I don't know. But I felt a real attachment to it. And I didn't mean to write about it again in Once Upon a Wardrobe, but that book grew out of Becoming Mrs. Lewis. And then this novel grew out of my research for Once Upon a Wardrobe when I learned about Operation Pied Piper. And so the only place to set a novel about Pied Piper is the British countryside, because that's where the children were set. So, I just think that there's something really mystical about the British countryside. I love the traditions. I love the stories. And I mean, let's be honest, I'm 99.999%, Anglophile. So
Right. Well, I spent a lot of time in Oxford and really like it. And I can see why. But I do have a question about Oxford. It's in the novel.
yes,
Did Hitler spare Oxford
yes,
because he wanted it for his
yes,
own when he
yes,
won the war?
yes. That was the talk, was that he would use the Thames to fly straight up and follow the river to London, but he wanted to spare Oxford for his own. And I put that in this novel, and I think I talk about it even in Becoming Mrs. Lewis, because that's where I learned about that,
Uh,
that the reason Oxford had been spared, and can you imagine if they had damaged that place, that mystical, ancient place of reverence and academic scholarship? Yeah, it wasn't touched.
in London, your neighborhood of choice, and again, these are places that my wife and I are very fond of. I mean, you like the Bloomsbury
Yes,
and Kensington Gardens, and
yes.
a lot of what goes on in your book is either where Hazel and her mom lived in Bloomsbury. Now that's of course Oxford is literary with Tolkien and so on, and Lewis, and Bloomsbury is literary for you. How?
Well, there was the Bloomsbury Group, and Virginia Woolf lived there. And this novel is everything I chose is a bit soaked in story. Even the little hamlet that the children go to is called Binzie. It's where Lewis Carroll wrote much of Alice in Wonderland. It's where the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins did much of his poetry and wrote about the poplars. So each place I chose on purpose that they were story-soaked places.
Oh, absolutely.
So Oxford, Binzie, Bloomsbury. I wanted, there's a fairy tale at the core of this novel, and I wanted that to be hidden under every choice I made.
The action of the novel is Operation Pied Piper. Not everybody's going to know about the evacuees. Tell us about what the British had to do and why.
This is incredible. And even the name, Operation Pied Piper. So everybody knows the legend, lore, tale of children being sent from the cities to the country during World War II. And most Americans who know it only know it because of Narnia. That is where Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy came from. They were sent from the city to live in the country with the old professor who had a magic wardrobe. Well, when I found out it was called Operation Pied Piper, I got that thing, that chill that says, I'm curious about something, I ignore it at my own peril. And I looked, and Operation Pied Piper is a terrible legend. It is a legend about a piper who lures children away with a flute, and they disappear forever and drown in a river. And so that's where this story began. But yes, they sent over 800,000 children away in 4 days. In 4 days, 800,000 children were exiled from their families and sent to live with strangers.
One of the things that happens in your story is a lot of discussion of what is a story, what is a fairy tale, what is a myth, and so on. Now, the Pied Piper of Hamelin, the thing that ticked him off was he got rid of the rats for them.
And he didn't pay
And then they didn't pay him.
Yeah, he didn't pay up.
And in the end, he leads all the children away, and they drown.
In the River Wyvern. In Germany.
The Grimm's brothers' tales, they're not palatable.
No. So I always say, legends, folk tales,
Yes.
fairy tales, they're gruesome. In their original form, most of them are gruesome. And they have been Disneyfied, they've been cleaned up, they've been put into our little golden books. They've, been cleaned for us, but why they would name an operation to keep children safe after a legend of drowned and disappeared children is a mystery.
Somebody was in a hurry. Somebody wasn't paying attention.
Somebody wasn't paying attention. They were just like, let's lead the children away. Yes.
A lot of your story is about the nature of story, the importance of story. One of the things that that gets said is, and it's crucial to the plot, stories don't belong to anyone in particular.
Yeah.
But they do, and they don't.
Yes.
How do you parse out, not copyright exactly,
Yeah.
but in your novel there's this story, and it moves to America, and it gets
moves
published
through
over
time and
there,
space.
time and space. Who owns the story?
It's a fascinating subject, and I think, we talk about it as authors all the time because suddenly two novels will appear
Right.
about the same subject. Is there a universal unconscious? Are we all tapping into the same thing? Do we own stories? No, of course, plagiarism is an entirely different idea, but I love that there's a poet I love named Padraig O'Tuama. He's Irish. And he wrote an essay once and talked about how some people say there are 7 plots in the world and that we just tell them over and over. And that's what mythology is, legends. Those are all told in different ways across time and space. Some say there are only 3 plots in the world and we tell them over and over. And he says there's only one story in the whole world, and it's a question. And the question is, who am I? And I love that because that's what the book is about, is how we use story to find out who we are and where we're from and what it means. And so does that belong to any one person? It can't. Stories have been told since we could draw on cave walls. It's how we've made meaning of the world since the beginning of time.
It's how fiction writers
make
meaning of the world.
That's exactly right. And poets and musicians and songwriters.
What about folk?
Oh, I love
What do you
folk.
think not folk music or folk tales, but regular people, do you think that regular people does it rise to consciousness that they are thinking about their story? Or is it just somehow instinctive?
I think it's just archetypal. I mean, I think we're all the protagonist and hero of our own story, and we think about the world through how it's relating to us. We're the hero, right? We're never the villain. We are to somebody else, but to us, we're the hero of the story. And I think that since our brains are a meaning-making machine, and we're constantly trying to understand the world around us, we're telling ourselves a story, and maybe a false one, maybe one that we tell ourselves over and over. But whether we're conscious of how we're telling ourselves stories about our life, about our marriage, about how we met somebody, about our career, about our children, we're telling a story. And so we have to check whether that's real.
Part of internal storytelling might be self-delusion.
100%. We lie to ourselves the same way we lie to other people. I think that's what psychotherapy is for, is to find out what we're lying about. Yes,
right?
Yes.
There's a quote. I don't usually write down quotes, but here's...
Oh, I love that you did.
Peggy says, this is for you.
Okay.
Peggy says, writing fiction, which you do, has made her an adept liar. Quick to the story, but she didn't usually employ those skills with her mother.
Oh, I love that you chose that. I love that.
Are fiction writers like yourself? Or is there a temptation, because you can make up stories so easily, to become an adept liar?
Better at lying? I hope I haven't employed it for that.
No.
But what I do think happens, and I see it with other fiction and novelists too, is when asked a question, you can turn almost anything into a story. I think that's a moral question, whether you use that for good or bad. I would say that most storytellers are a bit of exaggerators, myth makers. We can take something that happened in 8th grade and through constant retelling it is a much better story. But I hope I don't use it to be quick to the lie.
Oh, and also motive matters, of course.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I think the primary use of storytelling in everyday life is entertainment.
100%. And connection.
Anybody who wants to tell me a story that is amusing, I'm in.
All in.
Please,
and
don't bore me, just tell me a story.
And also for connection, like to get to know each other, right? So we meet and we're new friends.
What's your story?
We're old friends. But if we were new friends, we tell stories. How'd you meet? Where did you grow up? So I think stories are used as much for entertainment as connection.
I'm being careful. If I fail here, I will fix it. I
I'm
don't
not
want
worried about
no
that.
no I don't want to give away
Oh,
the
a spoiler.
the spoiler. Yes, you have a character, Bridie,
Yes.
who is the mother who is a woman. She is a mother, and she takes in a couple of the evacuees from London. She's a kind of feminist. She's a really
Love her.
interesting character. She says, "No knight is necessary to save the princess." One of the things
exactly
that she
right.
says. But she's also a pagan
Yeah.
who worships the sun, not the Son of God,
Yeah.
but the Sun God.
Yeah.
How does that? Why Bridie? Why did you put the children with a person who was very virtuous but eccentric?
I wanted, once again, to soak the novel in story. And so the woman who, they call it billet, when you take a child in, you would billet them. The woman who chose them, because you chose children, her name is Bridget, but they call her Bridie. And I loved the juxtaposition of that there are two Bridgets that are really only one person in mythology and religion.
Uh-huh.
And one is Bridget, the Irish goddess, and one is Bridget, the Catholic saint. And they're celebrated on the same day. And so I love St. Bridget's Day. And I wanted to show this juxtaposition of this little village outside Oxford in the late 1930s, early 1940s, with it that this village has one chapel and one pub, as most good villages must, and that this was a place that was, run by and everybody went to the same little chapel. And so they would judge her, but at the same time, is she a goddess or a saint? And I wanted her to be telling stories to my little girls.
And she's an interesting kind of feminist.
Yes.
Not easily recognizable today. Her particular take on gender and
in
and
1939
mythology.
she would have been looked at askance, and today she might be too quiet, right? So I think that I wanted to give her an interesting and quirky personality, but also beloved. Everybody loves her still.
It runs through other books of yours, but in this book there is a kind of cerebral knowledge. People know things. They can think. They have logic. They reach conclusions, and there's also a kind of physical, visceral knowledge.
Oh, I like that.
And something that happens in this book from time to time is that two people meet, and they know each other. Is that? What do you? Obviously, well, I don't say obviously. It is my thought that you believe this.
I do.
Yes, of course.
Haven't you met somebody and you knew them, and knew that you would walk away from the first conversation as either dear friends or in love? Or I felt what I wanted to do in this story was show, and I'm always fascinated by it, you see it in my other work, this fine line between the invisible and the visible, the unseen and the seen, which is where story lives, that kind of thin place, which is what Binzi is, this village that feels very in between a magical world and a real world. The way that we try to navigate imagination and logic. How do we live with both of those? How do we live in an imaginary world while we create things, while living in a very real world where a war is going on? And so I wanted to show, I didn't want to dive into magical realism, except in the fairy tale, of course. But in the world, I wanted you to feel like maybe you were going into magical realism, but you were still grounded in reality.
There are some things beyond words, it says on 326.
Oh, I love that.
but you have to write them anyway.
Yes.
Well, all right, here, how do you reconcile as the author of a sentence that says there are some things beyond words when you're sitting down and you have the keyboard in front of you and you're going to make words? You're stuck if there are things that can't be expressed. How does that work?
I think it works the same way we know that there are things we can't see, right? We can't see love. You can't see sadness. You can't see. So I think that some of the things that are beyond words are things people understand. And I also think that different languages have words that we don't have, right? So in the Gaelic language, for example, they don't say, I am happy or I am sad. They say, the happy is on me or the
Oh,
sad is on me. So there are certain languages that have better expressions for what we might say is beyond words.
right. Eskimos have 50 words for
Exactly.
snow.
Exactly.
We haven't. I don't think this is not a spoiler, but early in the novel, a girl disappears,
Yes.
and a good deal of what goes on has to do with where did she go, what happened to her, is she dead, is she alive, and that the thread of investigation is through a story, because the story that she knew pops up elsewhere. Well, does that mean
How did this story survive and she didn't?
right? But it looks as for a while as if that is the case. And one of the things that comes later is you must have done a little research into memory theory. That is,
I have.
there are things you remember, there are things you forgot but you can recover,
Yes.
recovered memory. Then there are things that you think you remember but they're false memory,
Yes.
and they're all in here.
Yes.
What?
And I've explored the idea of memory in other novels. I did it in The Favorite Daughter. Like, what is a real memory? What is something? I did it, whether you're losing your memory, did I remember that from a picture or did I remember that because I really remember it? And yes, in this novel, the main character, Hazel, feels a lot of guilt because she believes that it is her fault that her
Right.
sister disappeared. So as she plays the scene over and over and over in her head of the day she disappeared, it starts to morph and change until it is definitely her fault. Or maybe it's not, but has it become that way? And then I'm very interested in repressed memories, right? The ones we have before we have language to remember them, and how people can tell you a story when you're young and tell you something over and over till that is the truth and your truth is buried.
Yes,
But we
it's
hold
important.
our memories in our bodies. We do. We hold them in our bodies.
If a character or a person we know thinks that God has directed him or her
To
do something, does that make that person, is that a legal issue, an ethical issue, no issue at all?
Interesting.
What happened? Well, it's in the book, of course.
I know.
But what do we make of someone who says, I did that because God told me to, and they mean it?
And they mean it.
Yes.
So that is the ethical question about a woman who thinks she was told to do something
Yes,
that
right.
obviously is illegal, morally derelict,
Yes.
and wrong. And yet she is so firm in her belief of that I find it interesting to look at somebody else's point of view. So if we're standing here, we're saying, that's insane, but she's standing there saying, I did the right thing.
Right.
And those two different stories can't even meet in the middle.
Well, if you're the Hillside Strangler, this is bad. If you're
Yes.
Joan of Arc, it's not so bad.
Right. Exactly, right? So God told me to do it, but now this terrible thing has happened. Yep.
You have it. I don't know that all your readers know this, but you are an RN,
Yes.
and you were a practicing pediatric nurse.
Yeah.
And I've read a lot of your work, and I don't remember any nurses
No, it's the first
before.
time.
So this book has nurses in it.
Yes.
And I was trying to imagine a moment when you said, should I go forward and put nurses in my book?
I don't
Tricky
think
business
that
for
way.
you, no?
I didn't even think, shouldn't I? The nurses existed when I started writing this story. It's World War II. There's a little village right outside of Oxford, and they are volunteer nurses, and I had done my research on them. And when I was midway through writing the book, and there's a scene, not a spoiler, but where they have to tend to some of the Dunkirk refugees.
Yes, absolutely
from
right.
Dunkirk.
Yes.
And the horror of what they thought they were just going to be wiping the brows of young, handsome soldiers versus tending to someone who'd been maimed.
Absolutely.
And I wanted, it's not a big part of the story,
No.
but I really wanted to show that what these nurses do and do now isn't just, wearing a little white uniform and doing brow wiping.
Something that not everybody knows is that Lady Brett Ashley in The Sun Also Rises is emotionally distressed because she was, in fact, a volunteer nurse in World War I.
Wow.
And it's in there, it's just in passing.
It's just mentioned in passing, so we don't even notice.
A part of her imbalance is that she, like Jake, has
seen things.
maimed, injured by the war. The rate of production for you has been prodigious. I think we sat down 2 years ago and talked about surviving Savannah.
Yeah.
What's next? What do you? I mean, I know it's cruel because you're about to go home for the first time in 21 days and sleep in your own home, but surely there's within another 18 months or so there'll be another book. What do you?
Oh, it'll be
what are you gonna do
It'll
next?
be at least 2 years.
Good.
I started one last year, and Don, for one of the first times, I worked on it for almost 9 months and put it away.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if I'll pick it back up. I do know that it was really hard to move on from this novel. It's one of the most immersive and favorite projects I've ever done. And I think I had trouble getting into another novel very quickly. But what I did is I took my favorite part of that and pulled it out and started something new. And I left myself enough breadcrumb trails that when I get back next week and it's time to sit back down, it'll be waiting for me.
I have no doubt. I mean, writer's block is unknown to you.
Oh, bad writing is known to me, but there's always something to say. So.
Absolutely. Well, when you say it, I'm looking forward to reading it. Our time is up.
What?
So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking to you.
It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure.